"Buy me, cowboy. I will make sure you are satisfied," said the Apache woman on sale. The town of Red Rock was as dusty as it was forgotten. Nestled on the edge of a barren planet where the sky always seemed to glow orange, it was the kind of place where people came to disappear. A few weary settlers, a handful of ranchers, and the occasional drifter made up the population. No law, no rules, just the unforgiving landscape and the promise of a hard, lonely life. Jake Callahan had been drifting from one planet to another, trying to find something he couldn't name. He was a man of few words and fewer needs. All he wanted was land to call his own and peace from the chaos of the galaxy. A rancher at heart, Jake had made a name for himself on the Outer Rim, but the pull of Red Rock had drawn him in. The ranch he'd been promised was waiting, untouched, wild, and ready to be tamed. But it was the auction that had brought him to town. Jake hadn't planned on attending. Auctions weren't his thing, yet there was something about the way people talked about this one that made him curious. Rumors had been circulating about a unique item on the block, a woman like no other, a woman on sale. The idea sounded absurd to him, yet his boots found their way into the dusty hall. Inside, it was a simple building, wooden walls and a handful of benches. A crowd had already gathered. Some were rough-looking settlers, others were business types in expensive clothes that didn't match the world they were standing in. The auctioneer, a man in a dirty suit, paced the front of the room, his voice booming as he listed off the usual goods: livestock, tools, machines. But when the auctioneer turned to the final item, everything changed. "A rare opportunity, folks," he announced, his voice dripping with excitement. "She's a true gem, an Apache woman, brought here from the edge of the stars. Unbroken, strong, and ready for a new master. Buy her, and she will ensure that your needs are met." Jake didn't like the sound of that. His hands tightened around the worn straps of his leather gloves, but his feet stayed rooted to the spot. He watched as the auctioneer gestured toward a woman who stood tall, her posture proud despite the chains that held her wrists. She was striking. Her skin was a rich shade of brown, her black hair braided tightly down her back. Her eyes, dark and intense, scanned the room as though daring anyone to challenge her. There was a calm power about her that struck Jake immediately. She wasn't afraid, not like the others he had seen, broken by years of hardship. "Her name is Tala," the auctioneer continued, holding up a datapad that flickered with images of her. "Descendant of an ancient Earth lineage, brought from a long-lost colony. She is an extraordinary woman, strong, capable, and loyal, if you can earn her trust. But be warned, she is not like the others. You will need to prove you are worthy of her." Jake couldn't take his eyes off her. There was something magnetic about her, something wild and untamed, just like the land he had always longed for. No, Tala was a force. The auctioneer's voice pulled him back to reality. "Starting bid, 20,000 credits." Jake's heart skipped a beat. 20,000? That was a small fortune, a price he had never considered for any woman, but there was a sense of finality in the air. Something told him that this was a choice he had to make. This was no ordinary auction. He had no idea why, but he could feel his palms begin to sweat. The bid started slow, then picked up. There was an older man in the back, grizzled and rough-looking, who seemed eager. 30,000! He called out, his voice full of authority. Jake didn't flinch. He had no intention of buying a woman. But for some reason, his mind couldn't stop thinking about her, about the quiet strength in her eyes. 40,000, Jake heard himself say before he could even think about it. The auctioneer stopped mid-sentence and turned to him, his eyes wide in disbelief. 40,000? He looked back at the room as if to gauge the reaction. The older man looked at Jake for a moment, then huffed. 50,000, he growled, his tone cold and dismissive. Jake's jaw clenched. His instincts told him this was his moment, his decision to make. He wasn't sure why, but he could feel it in his gut. This was no ordinary auction. And this was no ordinary woman. 60,000, Jake said, his voice steady. A hush fell over the room. The auctioneer's eyes widened, and the older man's face turned red with frustration. "Sold!" The auctioneer banged his gavel. "To the man in the front!" Jake stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his bones. He had just bought a woman. No, not just any woman, but a woman with power, with history. A woman whose life was now tied to his, whether he understood it or not. As Tala was brought to him, her eyes met his for the first time, and for a moment neither of them spoke. There was a silent understanding between them. She didn't look like someone who needed saving, but Jake knew that something had shifted in the universe. She was his now, for better or worse. "Follow me," Jake said quietly, his voice rough. Tala didn't respond with words, but she nodded, the faintest of acknowledgments. She knew who he was now, and she knew this was the beginning of something neither of them could control. The doors to the auction hall opened, and the dust of Red Rock swept in, marking the start of a new chapter in both their lives. Jake Callahan's boots kicked up the dust as he led Tala away from the auction hall. His ranch was a small, rugged piece of land, nestled on the outskirts of Red Rock. It had been promised to him by an old friend, a fellow rancher who had passed on. Now Jake was the one who had to make something of it. But today he had made a decision that would change everything. The woman he had just bought, Tala, was nothing like the other settlers or workers he'd met in his travels. There was a fire in her eyes, a quiet strength that stood out against the backdrop of the small town's usual misery. Jake had seen that same look in the wild creatures he hunted on distant planets, creatures that did not bend easily. He wasn't sure if that frightened him or intrigued him more. They walked through the narrow streets of Red Rock, the crowd of onlookers whispering behind them. Some eyed Jake with skepticism, others with judgment. Tala walked silently beside him, her posture straight and unyielding, as though she was already taking in her new world with careful observation. Jake didn't say anything at first. What could he say? What was there to say?
He had bought her.
That was it. And now, there she was, walking beside him like a shadow. When they reached his homestead, Jake stopped at the old wooden gate, his heart racing for reasons he couldn't explain. The ranch looked untouched. The land was vast and empty, waiting for someone to take it under control. A handful of old buildings and a few cattle stood in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was his. "Here we are," Jake said finally, his voice rough. Tala didn't respond right away. She stood still for a moment, taking in the land before her. There was something about the way she looked at the open plains, as if the land spoke to her in a language that Jake couldn't hear. "I'll make you a deal," she said after a moment, her voice low but strong. Jake turned to face her, surprised. A deal? What could she offer him that he hadn't already bought? "You'll see the land, but not as it is now," Tala continued. "I can make it grow. I can make it flourish. But it comes with a price." Jake frowned. A price? Tala's eyes met his, and there was something in them that made him pause. "Not a price in credits or gold," she said. "A price in trust." "You have to trust me. I can offer you things that you won't find anywhere else. Things that will change this place. Change everything. But you need to trust that I'm not here to harm you. You bought me, but I didn't come willingly." Jake didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't used to trusting anyone, especially not in a place like Red Rock where betrayal was a common currency. "I've seen what you can do," Jake said, his voice wary. "But I don't know you. I don't know if I can trust you." Tala's lips curled into a faint smile. "That's why you bought me. You knew there was something more to me than just a body on sale." Jake didn't answer. The truth of her words hung in the air, thick and undeniable. She was right. He had felt something in her presence, something powerful, something that went beyond mere curiosity. "I'll show you," Tala said, walking toward the center of the ranch. "But first I need to know that you won't hold back." Jake watched as Tala moved with purpose, her every step seeming to command the land beneath her feet. She knelt down in the dirt, her hands gently pressing into the earth. He felt a strange tension in the air, as though the very ground itself was responding to her touch. For a moment nothing happened. Then the grass beneath her hands began to stir. Slowly it grew, winding up around her fingers, stretching upward toward the sky. Within seconds, the ground around them was covered in vibrant green grass, blooming flowers and shrubs that seemed to come to life out of nowhere. Jake stared, his eyes wide in disbelief. "What in the stars is this?" he whispered. Tala looked up at him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "This is just a taste of what I can do. The earth is in my blood. My people, the Apache, have always been connected to the land. My ancestors could make the earth bend to their will, but that power is not without its cost." Jake swallowed hard. "What cost?" "Trust," Tala repeated. "I can help you build this ranch, make it thrive like nothing you've ever seen. But you must never doubt me. If you do, the land will turn against you, just like it did for the ones who came before you." Jake nodded slowly, trying to process her words. This was unlike anything he had ever seen or heard of before. The idea of such power was terrifying, yet fascinating. "So what do I need to do?" Jake asked, his voice hesitant. "First," Tala said, standing up and brushing the dirt from her hands, "you need to understand that I am not just a worker here. I am a partner. What happens here, what I do for this land, will affect both of us. You have to see it as an equal relationship." Jake didn't know how to respond to that. He had never had a partner in his life. He had always worked alone, never relying on anyone but himself. The idea of working alongside Tala, of sharing this land with her, felt strange. "I'll take care of the land," Tala said. "But you'll need to take care of me. You bought me, but it's not just about owning me. It's about understanding that I am part of this place now." "What exactly do you mean by that?" Tala smiled again, a little more gently this time. "You'll see. I'm not just here to help you. I'm here to show you a way of life that most have forgotten. A way to live in harmony with the land, with each other. But only if you trust me." He wasn't sure if he was making a huge mistake or if he had just stumbled onto something that could change everything. As the sun began to set over the plains, casting long shadows over the land, Jake looked at Tala and nodded. "All right, I'm in. Let's see what you can do." Tala's eyes softened, and for the first time Jake saw a hint of something other than strength in her gaze, something almost vulnerable. "I knew you'd understand," she said softly. As night fell over Red Rock, the stars above them sparkled brightly, and for the first time since arriving on this planet, Jake felt like, maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he needed to be. The days that followed felt like a blur for Jake Callahan. He had always been a man of routine, a man who knew the land like the back of his hand. But since meeting Tala, his world had shifted in ways he couldn't have imagined. Every morning, the land seemed to wake up a little more, as though it too had been waiting for her touch. The crops were growing faster, the cattle seemed healthier, and even the wind carried a sense of promise that hadn't been there before. Tala worked alongside him, silently and without complaint. Her presence was a constant, steady, calm, and powerful. She didn't speak much, but when she did, Jake listened. There was wisdom in her voice, a depth that spoke of years, even centuries of knowledge. But there was still so much about her that Jake didn't understand. He had learned bits and pieces of her past, how she had come from a forgotten Earth colony, how her people had been scattered across the galaxy, and how she had survived by her own strength. But there were gaps in her story, parts of her past that she never spoke about. She had made it clear that the power she wielded was tied to her bloodline, to her ancestors, but she had never explained fully how it worked. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, Jake decided to press her for answers. They were sitting by the fire, the crackling of the flames the only sound between them. The ranch had settled into a peaceful quiet, and for the first time Jake felt like the weight of the universe had been lifted from his shoulders. "Tell me more about your people," Jake said, his voice low. He had asked before, but never like this, never with the urgency he felt now. What happened to them? Tala didn't look at him immediately. She stared into the fire, her face softened by the flickering light. There was a long pause before she spoke. "My people were once a great civilization," she began. "We lived in harmony with the earth, and later with the stars. We had the ability to connect with the land in a way that no one else could. We could make the earth bend to our will, heal it, grow it. We could summon the elements, control the wind and the rain. But then, it all changed." Jake listened closely, captivated by the story, though the weight of it hung heavy in the air. He could see the pain in her eyes, the deep sadness that had become a part of her. "War," Tala continued, her voice quiet but steady. "Our ancestors fought to protect the land, to keep the balance. But greed, hunger for power, it destroyed us. The leaders who once guided us betrayed us. Our connection to the earth was severed. My people were scattered across the stars, and the power we once had was lost." Jake shifted uncomfortably. He had heard of wars in the galaxy, of planets torn apart by the desire for control, but this was different. Tala wasn't just talking about a war. She was talking about the destruction of her people's very way of life. "Do you think it's possible to bring that power back?" Jake asked, his voice almost a whisper. Tala's eyes met his then, her gaze piercing and intense. "It's not a matter of bringing it back, Jake. It's about restoring the balance. But that balance can only be achieved if the right person steps forward. My people were guardians of the land, but they failed. Now, it is up to me." Jake's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what she was saying. He had always known there was something special about Tala, but he hadn't realized the weight of her heritage. The power she spoke of was not just a gift, it was a responsibility, one that she carried alone. "Why me?" Jake asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Why are you telling me this?" Tala studied him for a moment, as though weighing her words carefully. "Because you are different, Jake. You came here looking for something, just like I did. You want to make something of this land, but you can't do it alone. And I can't do it alone either." Jake's brow furrowed. "I don't understand. You're telling me I'm part of this somehow?" Tala nodded slowly. "You may not see it yet, but you are. The land has already begun to respond to you. You've been chosen as much as I have." Jake sat back, the weight of her words settling in. The land, the crops, the cattle, everything was changing. But had he been chosen? He had never thought of himself as anyone special. He was just a rancher, a man who had been searching for peace. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Jake admitted. "I've always done things my way. I don't know anything about restoring balance or whatever it is you're talking about." Tala's expression softened. "You don't have to do it alone. That's why I'm here. To help you understand. But you have to trust me, Jake. Trust that I can guide you." The air between them was thick with the unspoken weight of her words. Jake didn't know what to think. This was all happening too fast, and he wasn't sure he was ready for the responsibility that Tala was asking him to take on. He had come to Red Rock to make something of himself, not to become part of some ancient legacy. But as he looked into Tala's eyes, he saw the sincerity there. She wasn't asking for his trust for her own gain. She was asking for it because she knew something he didn't, something that could change everything. "I'll try," Jake said finally. "I'll trust you." Tala gave him a small, approving nod. "That's all I need." For the rest of the night, they sat together in silence, the crackling fire their only companion. Jake's mind was still reeling from what he had learned. The mysteries of Tala's past, the power she wielded, the land that seemed to be responding to her presence, it all seemed too much to take in. But he knew one thing for sure. His life had changed the moment he had bought her. And now, as they sat under the stars, Jake realized that the ranch he had hoped to build was no longer just about the land. It was about something far greater, something ancient and powerful, something that could shape not only his future, but the future of the galaxy itself. The days had turned into weeks, and the land of Red Rock was changing before Jake Callahan's eyes. The crops were lush, the cattle had flourished, and the ranch, once barren and desolate, was thriving. But as the land grew, so did the dangers that surrounded it. Tala's power had awakened something far larger than Jake had ever expected. The land was no longer just a piece of property. It had become something living, breathing, and in some ways, dangerous. And with that awakening came those who wanted to take it for themselves. Jake could feel it. The threat had been growing for days. Whispers of a corporate faction were circulating. A powerful company that specialized in exploiting natural resources, always looking for new ways to profit from the untamed lands of the galaxy. They had learned of the changes on Jake's ranch, and they had come to claim it. The ranch wasn't just a plot of land anymore. It was a key to something much bigger, something with the potential to change everything. One evening, just as the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Jake and Tala stood on the hill overlooking the ranch. The wind blew gently across the plains, the land beneath them quiet and still. But Jake could feel the tension in the air. "They're coming," Tala said, her voice as calm as ever. Jake didn't need her to say it. He had felt it for days, the strange energy that had been building. The land was warning them. "They want the land," Jake said, his voice low. "They don't care about what's right. They only care about making a profit." Tala nodded slowly. "It's not just the land they want, Jake. It's the power that comes with it. The Earth's ancient balance. It can't be controlled by greed."
"But that's what they're trying to do." Jake gripped the railing of the wooden porch, his knuckles turning white.
He had fought for his land before, but this was different. This wasn't just about protecting what was his. This was about protecting something far more important. "Do you think they'll stop?" Jake asked. "Do you think they'll give up?" Tala's gaze was unwavering as she looked toward the horizon. "No," she said softly. "They won't stop. Not until they have what they came for." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that the coming battle would test everything he had, his trust in Tala, his commitment to the land, and his own resolve. The night before the corporate fleet arrived, Jake and Tala worked together. Tala's powers had grown, and she was able to shape the land to create defenses, deep trenches, thick walls of stone, and barriers of thorny brush that would be almost impossible to cross. She didn't speak much as they worked, but Jake could see the strain on her face. This wasn't just a fight for the land. This was a fight for her people's legacy, and for something far greater than either of them. The morning came with an uneasy silence. Jake stood on the ridge overlooking the approaching fleet, his heart pounding in his chest. The ship was massive, a dark shadow against the bright sky. He could see the insignia of the corporation on the side, a symbol of power and control. They had come to take what they wanted, and they weren't going to leave without a fight. Jake turned to Tala. She stood by his side, calm and focused, as though she had done this 1,000 times before. He could see the determination in her eyes, the knowledge that this battle was hers just as much as it was his. "I won't let them take this from you," Jake said firmly. Tala's expression softened and she placed a hand on his arm. "You're not alone in this, Jake. We stand together, as we always have." The first wave of the corporate soldiers landed on the ranch just as the sun began to rise. The ground trembled beneath their boots as they marched forward, their weapons raised. But they didn't know the land the way Jake and Tala did. They didn't know the power that lay beneath their feet. As the first group of soldiers crossed into the ranch's outer defenses, the earth beneath them suddenly shifted. Tala had used her power to draw the earth's energy up, creating a massive barrier of thorns that ensnared the soldiers. The sharp branches tangled around their limbs, pulling them to the ground. The soldiers struggled, but they couldn't break free. Jake moved quickly, leading the charge. He didn't hesitate, didn't stop to think about what was at stake. This was his land, and he would protect it with everything he had. He and Tala fought side by side, each one using their unique strengths to push back the invaders. Tala's connection to the land was unmatched, and Jake's experience with combat gave him the edge in the physical fight. But the battle was only beginning. The corporate forces were relentless. They sent wave after wave, each more determined than the last. But no matter how many soldiers they threw at the ranch, they couldn't break through the defenses. Tala's power, combined with Jake's grit, was enough to hold them off. The land itself seemed to fight with them, defending its new guardians. In the midst of the chaos, a figure appeared on the horizon. Jake squinted, trying to make out who it was. It was a man, standing tall and proud, walking directly toward them. "Who's that?" Jake muttered, watching the figure approach. Tala's expression darkened as she recognized him. "The leader of the corporation. He's come to finish what they started." Jake's heart raced as the man drew closer. He was dressed in a sleek black suit, his eyes cold and calculating. The leader of the corporate forces was no stranger to battle. He had the air of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. "You think you can stop me?" the man called out, his voice carrying over the battlefield. "You're just a couple of stubborn fools clinging to a dead land." Jake stepped forward, not bothering to speak. The man's words were empty, meaningless. Tala stepped beside him, her presence as powerful as the land itself. "This land belongs to no one but us," Tala said firmly. "And it will never be yours," the man sneered, raising his hand to signal the next wave of soldiers. But before he could give the order, the earth trembled beneath him. Tala had used her power to shift the very ground they stood on, creating a massive fissure that split the battlefield. The leader stumbled, his balance lost as the ground beneath him cracked wide open. "Leave," Tala commanded, "or face the consequences." The corporate leader glared at her, his face twisted in fury, but he knew when he was beaten. With a final defiant sneer, he turned and retreated, his soldiers following behind him. They had underestimated the power of the land and the strength of the bond between Jake and Tala. As the last of the corporate fleet disappeared into the sky, Jake turned to Tala. She was breathing heavily, her energy spent, but there was a sense of peace in her eyes. The battle was over, and they had won. Jake walked over to her, his heart still racing from the fight. "We did it," he said, his voice full of awe. Tala nodded, her gaze softening. "We did." The land was safe, and with it, the future they had fought for. Jake looked around at the ranch, the crops, the cattle, the land, and realized that what they had built together was more than just a home. It was a new beginning, and no one, no matter how powerful, could take that from them.